The sky darkened as rain pummeled the parched earth of Montana Territory, transforming the drought-stricken land into a treacherous sea in mere hours. Victoria Matthews stared in horror from her farmhouse window as water rose mercilessly around her property, swallowing the valley that had been her home for the past 3 years. She had never witnessed such fury from nature, not in all her 22 years of life, and certainly not since she had inherited this remote ranch after her father's passing. The year was 1876, and Victoria had been struggling to maintain the modest cattle operation on her own. Most folks in Willow Creek thought a woman had no business running a ranch, but Victoria had inherited her father's stubborn streak along with his land. Now, as thunder crashed overhead and water surged across her property, that stubborn determination was all she had left. "The creek's breached!" she cried out to no one but herself as she watched the swollen waters tear through the natural embankment that had always protected her land. The horses in the corral nearest the house whinnied in panic, pawing at the rising waters. Victoria grabbed her father's old shotgun and a canvas sack, stuffing it with whatever provisions she could gather quickly. The water was already seeping under the door when she made her desperate decision to climb higher. With trembling hands, she pushed open the trap door to the attic and hauled herself up, bringing her meager supplies with her. From the small attic window, she watched in devastation as the barn, the one her father had built with his own hands, groaned, shuddered, and finally gave way to the torrent. The sound of splintering wood cut through the roar of rain and floodwaters. Half of her cattle had been in that barn, and the others were scattered across pastures now submerged. Years of hard work washed away in minutes. The water rose relentlessly. When it began to seep through the floorboards of the attic, Victoria knew she had one option left. With her bag slung over her shoulder and her shotgun in hand, she climbed out through the attic window onto the sloped roof of her home. The cedar shingles were slick with rain, but she found a relatively stable position near the chimney, wrapping her arm around it for support. Miles away, Owen Fletcher urged his exhausted horse forward through the downpour. He had been on the trail for weeks, driving a small herd of cattle to his newly purchased ranch near Willow Creek when the storm hit. He'd lost half his herd to the flash flood, and the remaining animals had scattered to who knew where. His ranch hands had headed for higher ground toward town, but Owen had spotted smoke from a chimney in the valley below and worried someone might be trapped. 26-year-old Owen was new to Montana Territory, having left his family's successful cattle operation in Texas to stake his own claim. He knew floods had seen what they could do in the lowlands of East Texas, and the sight of water rushing through this valley sent a chill through him despite the warm spring air. As he approached what should have been a modest homestead, all he could see was water stretching in every direction and the peak of a roof barely visible above the flood. His heart sank, assuming whoever lived there had already fled, or worse. Then he saw her, a figure clinging to the chimney, dress soaked through, long dark hair plastered against her back. "Hello," he called out, guiding his horse as close as the floodwaters would safely allow. "Are you hurt?" Victoria turned at the sound of his voice, relief and suspicion warring in her expression. Strangers could mean danger for a woman alone, even in circumstances like these. "Who are you?" she called back, her voice nearly lost in the howling wind. "Owen Fletcher. I've got a place north of here." He pointed toward higher ground. "We need to get you down from there before the whole house goes." Victoria clutched her shotgun tighter. "I can't swim." Owen assessed the situation quickly. The floodwater had almost reached the eaves of the house, and the structure was clearly compromised, shifting slightly with each powerful surge. He guided his horse closer, the animal reluctantly wading chest deep into the flood. "I'm coming to you," he called. "Just hold on." The distance between them was only about 15 feet, but with the swirling current, it might as well have been a mile. Owen secured his rope to his saddle horn and tied the other end around his waist. His horse, a sturdy buckskin gelding named Samson, was trained to stand ground even in difficult conditions. Owen slipped off the saddle into the cold water. The current immediately tried to pull him away, but he fought against it, using the rope for stability as he made his way to the house. When he reached the edge of the roof, he called up to Victoria. "Give me your hand." Victoria hesitated, looking at the stranger with wary eyes. His hat was gone, revealing sandy brown hair plastered to his head. His eyes were sincere, concerned, not the eyes of someone with ill intentions. Still, trusting a stranger went against everything her father had taught her. Another crack sounded beneath her, and the decision was made for her as part of the roof began to give way. She gasped, scrambling higher toward the chimney. "Now or never, miss." Owen reached up both hands. Victoria tucked her shotgun into her bag and extended her hand downward. Owen's grip was strong and sure as he grasped her wrist. "I've got you," he assured her, "but you need to trust me and let go of that chimney." Victoria took a deep breath, sent a silent prayer skyward, and released her hold on the chimney. For a terrifying moment, she felt herself sliding down the slick roof toward the churning water. Then Owen's arms were around her waist, steadying her, guiding her. "Wrap your arms around my neck," he instructed, and she obeyed without question. The danger of her position had suddenly become far more real than any potential threat from this stranger. With one arm securely around her, Owen used the other to grip the rope, pulling them both toward where Samson stood patiently in the rising water. The journey back seemed to take forever, the current stronger than before, trying to sweep them both away. Victoria clung to him tightly, face buried against his shoulder, praying silently. When they finally reached Samson, Owen hoisted Victoria up onto the saddle first before pulling himself up behind her. She was shivering violently, her dress and hair soaked through, but alive. "Thank you," she managed through chattering teeth. "We're not safe yet," Owen replied, spurring Samson toward higher ground. "Hold on tight." Victoria leaned back against his solid chest, too exhausted and cold to worry about propriety. As they rode away, she glanced back once at her home or what was left of it. The roof was now completely submerged, only the chimney jutting above the water like a lone sentinel. "My cattle," she whispered, her voice breaking. "The barn's gone. Everything's gone." Owen didn't respond immediately, focusing on guiding Samson safely through the shallower water toward the rising ground ahead. Only when they reached a stand of pine trees on higher elevation did he finally ease their pace. "I lost half my herd too," he finally said, his voice gentle. "Stock can be replaced. You can't." Victoria wiped rain from her face, unsure if some of the moisture might be tears. "That was my father's ranch, everything he built, everything I've been fighting to keep." Owen guided Samson under the shelter of the pine trees, where the dense branches provided some relief from the downpour. "We need to get you warm," he said, dismounting and helping her down from the saddle. His hands lingered at her waist a moment longer than necessary, steadying her as her legs threatened to buckle beneath her. "I'm Victoria Matthews," she said, suddenly aware of the impropriety of their situation, alone in the wilderness with a man she'd just met. Yet circumstances had stripped away normal social conventions. "Most folks call me Tori." "Pleased to meet you, Miss Matthews, though I wish it were under better circumstances." Owen removed his duster coat, which was somehow less soaked than the rest of him, and draped it around her shoulders. "We need to make camp here until the rain stops. I've got some supplies in my saddlebags." Victoria nodded numbly, clutching the coat around her. She watched as Owen efficiently set about creating shelter, stringing a tarp between trees and gathering what dry kindling he could find beneath the pines. His movements were practiced, economical, suggesting years of life on the trail. "You're not from Montana," she observed as he worked on getting a small fire started under the shelter of the tarp. Owen glanced up, a faint smile crossing his weather-tanned face. "That obvious, huh? Texas born and raised. Bought land near Willow Creek 2 months ago." He coaxed a small flame to life. "You've been on that ranch long?" "My whole life," Victoria replied, moving closer to the growing fire. "My father brought me out here when I was just a baby. After my mother died of fever back east, he couldn't stand to stay in civilization. Said the wilderness suited him better." She stared into the flames. "He passed 3 years ago. I've been running it myself since." "Alone?" Owen couldn't hide his surprise. "I hire help when I can afford it. For cattle drives mostly. She lifted her chin slightly. I manage. Owen nodded, respect evident in his expression. That's no small feat. Ranching's hard enough with a full crew. He rummaged in his saddlebag and produced a small tin of coffee in a dented pot. It's not much, but hot coffee might help with the chill. As he prepared the coffee, Victoria took stock of their situation. The rain continued to fall, though less violently now, and darkness was settling over the landscape. From their elevated position, she could see the valley below transformed into a vast lake with only the tops of the tallest trees visible. "Do you think anyone else got caught in it?" she asked quietly. Owen's expression grew somber. "Hard to say. Most folks know better than to build in floodplains, but that was no ordinary flood. I sent my ranch hands toward town when the storm hit. They should have made it to higher ground." He paused. "I was heading back to my place when I saw your chimney smoke." Victoria met his eyes across the small fire. "You risked your life coming after me. Anyone would have done the same." "No," she said firmly. "Not anyone. Not out here." She'd lived in the territory long enough to know that survival often meant minding one's own business. Strangers didn't typically risk their lives for one another without good reason. Owen handed her a tin cup of black coffee. Their fingers brushed in the exchange, and Victoria felt a flutter in her chest that had nothing to do with her near-death experience. She quickly attributed it to the warmth returning to her body and focused on the steaming liquid. "We'll head to my place once the rain lets up," Owen said, settling back against a tree trunk. "It's about 5 miles north of here. You're welcome to stay until you figure out your next steps." Victoria stiffened. "That's very kind, but I should go into town. The marshal might—" "Miss Matthews," Owen interrupted gently, "there's not going to be much town left after this, and even if the buildings are standing, it'll be chaos. My ranch is on high ground with a solid roof and walls. I've got a spare room where you can stay proper-like." Victoria wanted to argue but found she lacked the energy. The events of the day were catching up to her, exhaustion settling deep in her bones. She nodded reluctantly. "Just until I can assess the damage," she conceded. Owen smiled, and for the first time, Victoria noticed the small crinkles at the corners of his eyes, the mark of a man who smiled often. "Of course." They fell into companionable silence, the crackling fire and drumming rain creating a cocoon of sound around them. Victoria fought to keep her eyes open, but eventually lost the battle, her head drooping forward. She woke with a start some time later to find herself leaning against Owen's shoulder, his arm loosely around her to keep her from falling into the fire. He was awake, staring into the flames, and straightened slightly when he realized she was awake. "I'm sorry," she said, mortified, pulling away. "No need for apologies. You've had quite a day." He removed his arm, giving her space. "The rain's stopping. We should be able to move on at first light." Victoria nodded, wrapping his coat tighter around herself and trying to ignore the lingering warmth where his arm had been. This man was a stranger, regardless of how he'd saved her life. She couldn't afford to develop any sort of attachment, not when her entire future was now uncertain. As promised, they set out at dawn. The sky had cleared to reveal a brilliant blue expanse, making the devastation below all the more shocking in the clear morning light. Victoria's throat tightened as they rode past what had been her property. Nothing remained visible of her house except the very top of the chimney. The barn was completely gone, along with the corrals and outbuildings. "I'm sorry," Owen said quietly, following her gaze. Victoria swallowed hard. "It's just wood and nails. It can be rebuilt." "That's the spirit," he replied, though they both knew it would take more than optimism to recover from such destruction. The journey to Owen's ranch took longer than expected, as they had to navigate around swollen creeks and washed-out sections of trail. By midday, they crested a hill to reveal a sturdy 2-story house perched on a gentle rise, with a large barn and several corrals spread out behind it. The buildings were new, the wood still fresh and unweathered. "It's not much yet," Owen said as they approached, "but it's got good bones." Victoria was impressed despite herself. The house was larger than her cabin had been, with a wide porch wrapping around two sides and plenty of windows. More importantly, it stood well above any potential floodline, with clear views of the surrounding countryside. "You built this yourself?" she asked as he helped her down from Samson. "Had some help from the men I hired, but yes, most of it." He looked at the house with evident pride. "Been working on it for 2 months straight since I arrived." The interior was sparse but clean, with a large main room serving as both kitchen and living area. A solid wooden staircase led to the second floor. "There's a bedroom upstairs you can use," Owen said, carrying her small bag of salvaged possessions. "It's not furnished proper yet, just a bed and a washstand, but it's dry and clean." "It's more than enough," Victoria assured him, following him up the stairs. She was acutely aware of how disheveled she must look, her dress mud stained and wrinkled, her hair a tangled mess. The bedroom was indeed simple but thoughtfully arranged, with a large window overlooking the valley below. Owen set her bag on the bed and showed her a small adjoining room with a copper tub. "I'll have my ranch hand Teddy bring up hot water when he returns. He and the others should be back by nightfall, assuming they made it to town safely." Owen paused at the door. "I'll see if I can find you some dry clothes. I don't have ladies' things, obviously, but maybe something that could be altered temporarily." Victoria nodded gratefully. "You've been very kind, Mr. Fletcher." "Owen," he corrected with a small smile. "After pulling someone off a roof in a flood, I think we can dispense with formalities." After he left, Victoria sank onto the edge of the bed, emotions finally catching up with her. She had lost nearly everything: her home, most of her livestock, her father's legacy. Yet here she was, alive and relatively unharmed thanks to a stranger's courage. She allowed herself a few minutes of quiet tears before straightening her shoulders. Self-pity wouldn't rebuild her ranch. She needed to be practical, to assess what remained and determine her next steps. But first, she desperately needed to wash away the mud and grime of the flood. By late afternoon, Victoria felt somewhat restored. She had bathed in the hot water Owen's returning ranch hands had provided and changed into the clothes he had left outside her door. A cotton shirt that swallowed her frame and a pair of trousers held up with suspenders, both rolled multiple times to accommodate her smaller stature. The ensemble was entirely improper, but given the circumstances, practicality trumped propriety. When she descended the stairs, she found Owen in conversation with 3 dusty, exhausted-looking men. They all turned at her entrance, and the youngest, barely more than a boy, openly stared at the sight of a woman in men's clothing, before the oldest elbowed him sharply. "Miss Matthews," Owen said, stepping forward, "these are my hands who made it back: Teddy Williams, Samuel Cooper, and Joe Harper. Men, this is Miss Victoria Matthews. She lost her ranch in the valley to the flood." The men nodded respectfully, mumbling greetings. "Pleased to meet you all," Victoria replied, trying to maintain her dignity despite her unusual appearance. "Thank you for the hot water. It was much appreciated." "We were just discussing the situation in town," Owen explained. "It's bad, but not as bad as it could have been. The main street is on higher ground, so most businesses survived. The lower areas took the worst of it." The oldest hand, Samuel, a weathered man with a silver-streaked beard, spoke up. "Marshall's organizing recovery efforts, says anyone who lost property should register at his office for government assistance." He glanced at Victoria. "Might be worth your while, miss, once the road's clear." Victoria nodded thoughtfully. "I'll need to see what's left of my place first." "Nothing's left of anything in that valley," Joe, a stocky man with a thick mustache, said bluntly. "Saw it coming back. Water's still too high to even start assessing." "Joe," Owen warned, seeing Victoria's expression tighten. "It's all right," she said quickly. "I appreciate honesty. I saw enough myself to know what to expect." Owen dismissed the men to get cleaned up and rest, leaving him alone with Victoria in the main room. "I hope you don't mind that I told them about your situation," he said, pulling out a chair at the table for her. Victoria sat down, folding her hands in her lap. "Not at all. It's hardly a secret now." She looked up at him. "What about your cattle? You mentioned losing half your herd." Owen's expression darkened slightly as he took the seat across from her. The boys spotted some survivors scattered in the hills. We'll round up what we can once the water recedes. He ran a hand through his hair, a gesture Victoria was beginning to recognize as a sign of frustration. It's a setback, but not a catastrophic one. I've got funds to restock. The way he said it matter of fact, without bravado, told Victoria that Owen Fletcher was a man of means, unlike herself. Her entire operation had been running on razor-thin margins, every penny reinvested in the ranch. She had no reserves to fall back on, no wealthy family to call upon. I should find work in town as soon as possible, she said, thinking aloud. Save enough to... There's no rush, Owen interrupted. You're welcome to stay here while you sort things out. Victoria met his gaze across the table. His eyes were a warm hazel, direct and honest. Something fluttered in her chest again, and this time she couldn't blame it on the after-effects of the flood. That's very generous, but I can't impose indefinitely. It wouldn't be proper. Mrs. Cooper Samuel's wife arrives next week from Texas. She'll be cooking and keeping house here. Her presence should satisfy any concerns about propriety. He leaned forward slightly. Besides, I could use your expertise. You know this territory better than I do, know the local markets, the best grazing lands. He hesitated. We could help each other, Miss Matthews. Victoria considered his words. The practical part of her recognized the wisdom in his suggestion. She needed time and resources to rebuild. He needed local knowledge. Yet another part of her, the part still raw from loss, bristled at the idea of depending on anyone's charity. I'll consider it, she finally said, but I insist on contributing while I'm here. I'm no stranger to ranch work. Owen's smile returned, warming his features. I never doubted that for a moment, Miss Matthews. The next morning, Victoria woke early, her body instinctively responding to the routine of ranch life despite her unfamiliar surroundings. She dressed in the borrowed men's clothing, securing her hair in a practical braid, and made her way downstairs. The main room was empty, the hearth cold. Through the window, she could see activity in the yard, men moving between the barn and corrals, the morning chores well underway. She found coffee already made and helped herself to a cup before stepping onto the porch. The air was crisp and clean after the storm, the sky washed to a perfect blue. From this elevation, she could see the extent of the flooding in the valley below, the water now receded somewhat, but still covering much of the lowlands. Somewhere down there was what remained of her life's work. Good morning. Victoria turned to find Owen approaching from the barn, his shirt sleeves rolled up to reveal tanned, muscular forearms. He carried a wooden crate filled with tools. You're up early, he observed. Force of habit, she replied, sipping her coffee. Cows don't milk themselves, even after a flood. Owen smiled at that. No, they surely don't. He set down the crate and leaned against the porch railing. I'm sending the boys to scout for strays today. Thought you and I might ride down to what's left of your place. See if anything can be salvaged. Victoria felt a surge of gratitude at his understanding. Many would have told her to forget the ranch entirely, to start fresh elsewhere. But Owen seemed to grasp instinctively that she needed to see it, to confront the loss directly before she could move forward. I'd appreciate that, she said simply. After a quick breakfast, they saddled up Victoria on a steady mare. Owen assured her was gentle but sure-footed and headed toward the valley. As they rode, Owen pointed out features of his property, speaking of his plans for expansion and improvement. His enthusiasm was infectious, and Victoria found herself offering suggestions based on her experience with the local climate and terrain. You've got a good eye for land, Owen commented as they paused atop a ridge. My father always said that was the most important skill in ranching, knowing good land when you see it. My father said something similar, Victoria replied, smiling at the memory. He used to let me choose where to graze the cattle, even when I was just a girl. Said I had a knack for finding the sweetest grass. Owen studied her for a moment. You miss him? It wasn't a question, but Victoria nodded anyway. Every day, but especially now, he would have known exactly how to start over. From what I can tell, he taught you well, Owen said, his voice gentle. "You've kept that ranch going on your own for 3 years. That's no small achievement." Victoria appreciated that he didn't patronize her with empty reassurances. As they continued downhill, the conversation turned to practical matters: the cost of lumber, the availability of labor in the territory, the best breeds of cattle for the Montana climate. By the time they reached what had been Victoria's property, the floodwaters had receded enough to expose the devastation. Her house still stood partially, though it listed dangerously to one side, its foundation undermined by the flood. The barn was completely gone, along with the smaller outbuildings. Debris was scattered everywhere: broken furniture, tools, sections of fencing carried from who knew where. Victoria dismounted silently, handing her reins to Owen. She needed to walk the property alone to see with her own eyes what remained and what was lost. He seemed to understand, staying back with the horses as she picked her way carefully through the mud and wreckage. She found surprisingly little worth salvaging. A cast-iron skillet here. Her father's toolbox there, miraculously wedged between rocks. Her mother's china cabinet lay shattered, the delicate plates and cups reduced to shards. The vegetable garden she had tended so carefully was now buried under a layer of silt. But the most painful discovery came when she rounded what remained of the house. There, half buried in mud, was her father's fiddle case. She knelt and carefully extracted it, her hands trembling slightly as she opened the warped lid. The instrument inside was damaged beyond repair. Its neck snapped, the body cracked and waterlogged. Something broke inside Victoria then. She had maintained her composure through everything: the flood itself, the dangerous rescue, the loss of her home, but the sight of her father's beloved fiddle, the one he had played on quiet evenings while teaching her the old songs, was too much. She sank to her knees in the mud, clutching the broken instrument to her chest as tears finally came freely. She didn't hear Owen approach, only became aware of his presence when he knelt beside her, placing a gentle hand on her shoulder. He loved music, she managed between sobs, said it was the only civilized thing he couldn't live without out here. Owen didn't offer empty platitudes, just stayed beside her, his hand steady on her shoulder until the worst of her grief had passed. "I'm sorry," she finally said, wiping her eyes with her sleeve. "It's foolish to cry over a fiddle when everything else is gone too." "It's not foolish at all," Owen replied, his voice low and sincere. "Some things carry more than their weight in memories." He gently helped her to her feet. "May I?" Victoria hesitated, then handed him the broken fiddle. Owen examined it carefully, turning it over in his hands. "The neck's broken clean, and there's a crack in the body, but it could be repaired by someone who knows their craft." He looked up at her. "There's a German fellow in Helena who repairs instruments. Next time I make a supply run, we could send it to him." Victoria stared at him, surprised by the offer and the fact that he'd said "we" so naturally, as if her problems were already partially his to solve. "I couldn't afford to consider it a loan," Owen cut in, "to be repaid when you're back on your feet." She wanted to refuse, to insist she could manage on her own as she always had, but the kindness in his eyes stopped her. Pride had its place, but so did accepting help when genuinely offered. "Thank you," she said simply. They spent another hour searching the property, gathering what few items could be salvaged into saddlebags. As they prepared to leave, Victoria stood looking at the remains of her home one last time. "I'll rebuild," she said firmly, more to herself than to Owen. "Not here somewhere higher, but I'll rebuild." Owen, already mounted on his horse, nodded. "I don't doubt it for a moment, Miss Matthews." The ride back to Owen's ranch was quieter, both lost in their own thoughts. Victoria felt emotionally drained, but somehow lighter, as if seeing the destruction firsthand had allowed her to begin processing it properly. When they crested the final hill and Owen's ranch came into view, something shifted in Victoria's perception. Yesterday, it had been just a place of refuge, somewhere to stay temporarily. Now, with the full reality of her situation clear, she looked at the sturdy house and well-planned outbuildings with new eyes, seeing not just shelter, but a possible path forward. The following weeks fell into a rhythm that surprised Victoria with its naturalness. True to his word, Owen sent the broken fiddle to Helena for repairs with his regular supply wagon. Mrs. Cooper arrived from Texas, a no-nonsense woman in her 50s who took one look at Victoria in her borrowed men's clothes and immediately set about altering some of her own dresses to fit. "Can't have you running around like that indefinitely," she'd said briskly. "Men get ideas." Victoria had caught Owen's amused glance at this pronouncement, but noticed he didn't contradict his housekeeper. In truth, Victoria was grateful to return to proper attire, though she kept the men's clothing for work around the ranch, and work she did. Despite Owen's insistence that she was a guest, Victoria refused to be idle. She helped with the cooking and mending, joined the men in searching for strays, and offered her knowledge of local markets when Owen was planning his first cattle sale. She also rode regularly to town, meeting with the marshal about possible government assistance and checking on neighbors who had also lost property in the flood. The community was slowly recovering, neighbors helping neighbors rebuild where they could. One evening about 3 weeks after the flood, Victoria sat on the porch, watching the sunset paint the distant mountains in hues of gold and purple. She was mending one of Owen's shirts, enjoying the peaceful moment after a busy day. The screen door creaked, and Owen emerged, 2 cups of coffee in hand. He offered one to Victoria, who accepted it with a smile of thanks. "Beautiful evening," he commented, settling into the chair beside her. "It is," she agreed. "Hard to believe the same sky was trying to drown us all a few weeks ago." Owen chuckled. "Nature's fickle that way." He took a sip of his coffee, watching her nimble fingers work the needle through fabric. "You don't have to do that, you know." Victoria glanced up. "Do what?" "Mend my shirts. Mrs. Cooper would." "Mrs. Cooper has enough to do," Victoria interrupted with a smile. "Besides, I don't mind. Keeps my hands busy while my mind works." "And what's your mind working on tonight?" Owen asked, his tone casual but his eyes attentive. Victoria set down her mending, considering how to answer. In truth, her thoughts had been increasingly occupied with plans for the future and with the man sitting beside her. "I've been thinking about land," she finally said. "The marshal mentioned there's a parcel available up near Broken Rock Creek, higher ground with good water access." She hesitated. "It's smaller than my old place, but the price is fair, especially with the government assistance." Owen was quiet for a moment. "You're thinking of rebuilding there?" Victoria nodded. "It seems the sensible option. I can't stay here indefinitely." "Why not?" The question was so direct, so unexpected, that Victoria could only stare at him. Owen set his coffee cup down and turned to face her fully. "I'm not saying you should stay as things are now," he clarified. "But we work well together, Victoria. You know this territory. No ranching. I have the capital to build something substantial here." He paused, seeming to choose his next words carefully. "I'm proposing a partnership." "A partnership," Victoria repeated, uncertain of his meaning. "To start with," Owen said, his gaze unwavering, "though I hope it might grow into something more given time." Victoria felt her heart skip a beat as his implication became clear. "Mr. Fletcher." "Owen," he corrected gently. "Owen," she amended. "Are you suggesting, that is, are you speaking of a business arrangement or—" "Both, eventually," he replied with disarming honesty. "I admire you, Victoria. Your courage, your determination, your knowledge. These past weeks have shown me that we complement each other well." A faint smile touched his lips. "And I can't deny I find your company more than agreeable." Victoria set her mending aside completely, her hands suddenly unsteady. "This is very unexpected." "Is it?" Owen asked quietly. "I've seen how you look at this place sometimes not as a temporary shelter, but as something you could help shape. And I've caught you looking at me the same way." Heat rose to Victoria's cheeks at his directness. She couldn't deny the truth in his words. Despite her best efforts to maintain emotional distance, she had found herself increasingly drawn to Owen Fletcher. His quiet competence, his kindness, his unwavering respect for her abilities. You barely know me, she said, though the objection sounded weak even to her own ears. I know enough, Owen replied. I know you're the kind of woman who keeps fighting even when a flood takes everything. I know you care more about your father's fiddle than your own comfort. I know you can outwork most men I've met. His voice softened. The rest, I'm eager to learn, if you'll give me the chance. Victoria looked out at the darkening landscape, her mind racing. She had come to Montana Territory with her father seeking independence and had fought to maintain it after his death. The idea of entering any kind of partnership business or otherwise both tempted and terrified her. I need time to think, she finally said. Owen nodded, seemingly unsurprised. Of course, this isn't a decision to make lightly. He stood, preparing to go inside, but paused. Just know that while you're considering that land by Broken Rock Creek, there's already a place for you here, in whatever capacity you choose. After he left, Victoria remained on the porch long after darkness had fallen completely, weighing options and examining her own heart with the same practical scrutiny she would give to a business proposition. By the time she finally went inside, she had reached no firm conclusion, but felt strangely at peace with the uncertainty. The next day brought news from town. The marshal had confirmed Victoria's eligibility for government assistance, and the fiddle had returned from Helena, expertly repaired. Owen presented the instrument to her after dinner, the polished wood gleaming in the lamplight. The craftsman said it's good as new, he told her. Maybe better he reinforced some weak spots in the body. Victoria cradled the fiddle reverently, running her fingers over the smooth wood. It's beautiful work. She looked up at Owen, suddenly shy. My father taught me to play a little. Would you like to hear it? The simple question felt significant somehow, an offering of something personal, a piece of herself beyond the practical rancher he'd come to know. Owen's smile was warm. I'd like that very much. Victoria positioned the fiddle under her chin, feeling the familiar weight of it, a tangible connection to her father. She began with a simple folk tune, one of the first he had taught her. The notes were hesitant at first, her fingers remembering the pattern slowly, but soon the melody flowed more smoothly. When she finished, she looked up to find Owen watching her with an expression that made her heart beat faster. That was lovely, he said softly. My father played it better, she admitted with a small smile. I doubt he played it with more feeling. The sincerity in his voice touched something deep within her. Before she could respond, there was a sharp knock at the door. One of the ranch hands, Teddy, entered looking agitated. Boss, riders coming up the road. Looks like trouble. Owen was on his feet immediately. How many? 3, moving fast. Owen grabbed his rifle from above the fireplace. Stay inside, he told Victoria, his voice suddenly hard. Lock the door behind us. Before she could protest, he and Teddy were gone. Victoria moved to the window, peering out into the darkness. She could make out figures on horseback approaching the house, their movements indeed suggesting urgency. Then she heard Owen's voice, raised in greeting rather than warning, and the tension in her shoulders eased somewhat. She unlocked the door and stepped onto the porch in time to see Owen shaking hands with a tall, official-looking man flanked by 2 others. Miss Matthews, Owen called, spotting her. This is Marshal Davis from town. He's looking for you. Victoria descended the porch steps, conscious of the marshal's assessing gaze. Marshal, is something wrong? Not wrong exactly, the marshal replied, removing his hat respectfully. But there's been a development regarding your property claim. A man named James Harker has filed paperwork saying he purchased your land from your father 5 years ago. Says he has a deed to prove it. Victoria frowned in confusion. That's impossible. My father would never have sold our land, especially not to James Harker. The man tried to force us out for years. The marshal nodded grimly. I thought as much. Harker's been trying to consolidate holdings in that valley for some time. With the flood damage, he probably figured now was his chance to make a move. But I need you to come to town tomorrow to make a formal statement. He's submitted what looks like a deed with your father's signature. It must be forged, Victoria said firmly. My father's papers were in a metal box in his desk. The box might have survived the flood. Worth checking, the marshal agreed. I can escort you back to your property at first light. Owen stepped forward. I'll accompany you both, if you don't mind. The marshal glanced between them, a question in his eyes that he chose not to voice. As you wish, Mr. Fletcher. We'll meet here at dawn. After the marshal and his deputies departed, Victoria paced the main room anxiously. Harker must have been watching the property, waiting for his chance. The flood gave him the perfect opportunity. You mentioned he tried to force you out before? Owen asked, his expression concerned. Victoria's mouth tightened. He's a land speculator. Came to the territory 5 years ago and started buying up every parcel he could. Made my father an offer, and when he refused, Harker turned nasty. Threatened us, tried to divert our water supply. She shook her head. Father eventually had to involve the previous marshal to make him back off. And now he's trying to claim he actually purchased the land? Owen's voice held controlled anger. That's bold, even for a speculator. Victoria stopped pacing, a sudden realization hitting her. The metal box, if it survived, it would contain the original deed with my father's real signature. They could compare it to whatever forgery Harker's produced. Then we find that box, Owen said decisively. First thing tomorrow. Morning brought clear skies and the marshal's return. The three set out for Victoria's flood-ravaged property, the journey largely silent as each contemplated what they might find. When they arrived, Victoria was struck anew by the devastation, though the floodwaters had receded significantly, revealing more of the mud-covered ruins. The desk was in Father's bedroom, she told the men, picking her way carefully through the unstable structure. Against the east wall. The room in question was barely recognizable, the outer wall partially collapsed and everything inside coated in dried mud. The desk itself was still there, though, waterlogged and tilting, but remarkably intact. The box should be in the bottom drawer, Victoria said, kneeling beside it despite her dress. The drawer was swollen shut, requiring Owen's strength to pry it open. Inside, among sodden papers and ruined books, was a small metal strongbox. Victoria reached for it with trembling hands. The box was dented but intact, its lock still secure. The key, she murmured, suddenly panicked. It was on my father's watch chain, in my jewelry box. Which would be where? The marshal asked. My bedroom, across the hall. The three of them moved to what remained of Victoria's bedroom. The jewelry box was nowhere to be found, likely carried away by the floodwaters. We'll have to break it open, the marshal decided, eyeing the metal box. If you're certain the deed is inside. I'm certain, Victoria confirmed. Father kept all important papers there. Back outside, Owen used tools from his saddlebag to work on the lock, while Victoria watched anxiously. When the box finally opened with a reluctant creak, she held her breath as the marshal carefully extracted the papers inside. They were damp but legible, and there, on top, was the original deed to the Matthews Ranch, bearing her father's distinctive signature. This should be sufficient to disprove Harker's claim, the marshal said, carefully separating the documents. We'll need to let these dry properly, then have them legally verified. But I'd say your property is secure, Miss Matthews. Relief washed over Victoria. The land itself might be devastated, but it was still hers, her father's legacy intact, at least legally. Owen placed a supportive hand on her shoulder. That's one battle won. But the marshal's expression remained grave. Harker's not one to give up easily. When he learns his forgery has been discovered, he might try other tactics. He looked directly at Victoria. You should be careful. Until this matter is settled, I'd advise staying at Mr. Fletcher's ranch, for safety. Victoria nodded, a chill running through her at the warning. James Harker had a reputation for ruthlessness, and now he'd be desperate and angry. They returned to town, where the marshal officially recorded Victoria's statement and promised to confront Harker immediately with the evidence of forgery. Victoria and Owen spent several hours in town, visiting the general store for supplies and checking on neighbors affected by the flood. As they prepared to leave town in the late afternoon, a commotion near the saloon caught their attention. A large man with an ostentatious vest was shouting at the marshal on the boardwalk, his face flushed with anger. "That's Harker!" Victoria whispered to Owen, instinctively stepping closer to him. Owen's expression hardened as he watched the confrontation. "Let's avoid him. We can go around the back way." But it was too late. Harker had spotted them, his angry gaze fixing on Victoria with undisguised malice. He broke away from the marshal and strode toward them, his hand dangerously close to the revolver at his hip. "You think this is over, Matthews?" he called, his voice slurring slightly, suggesting he'd been drinking. "That land's going to be mine one way or another." Owen stepped protectively in front of Victoria, his posture tense but controlled. "That's enough, Harker. The marshal's made his ruling," Harker sneered. "And who are you? Her new protector?" His gaze shifted back to Victoria. "Your daddy's not around to hide behind any more, girl. You can't run that ranch alone, and we both know it." Flood just hastened the inevitable. Victoria moved to stand beside Owen rather than behind him. "My father's deed is legal and valid, Mr. Harker. Your forgery wasn't even a good one." Harker's face darkened. "You'll regret crossing me. Both of you." His hand twitched toward his gun, but before he could draw, the marshal was there, flanked by deputies. "That's enough, Harker," the marshal said firmly. "You're drunk and making threats. That'll earn you a night in my jail to cool off." For a tense moment, it seemed Harker might resist, but eventually he allowed himself to be led away, though not before casting one last venomous glance at Victoria and Owen. "Charming fellow," Owen commented dryly as they watched Harker being escorted toward the jailhouse. "He's dangerous," Victoria replied, her voice low. "He's driven other small ranchers out of the territory before." Owen nodded grimly. "All the more reason to stick together." He helped Victoria onto her horse. "Let's get back before dark." The ride back to Owen's ranch was tense, both of them watching the trail carefully for any sign of trouble. Only when the house came into view did Victoria feel some of the tension leave her shoulders. That evening, after dinner, Victoria found herself once again on the porch with Owen, the encounter with Harker weighing heavily on her mind. "The marshal was right," she said finally, breaking the comfortable silence. "Harker won't stop just because his forgery was discovered. He wants that land." Owen nodded thoughtfully. "The question is why? That valley's been devastated by the flood. It'll be years before it's suitable for grazing again." "It's not about the grazing," Victoria explained. "There's a natural pass through the mountains on the north edge of our property. It's the easiest route to the rail line at Helena. Anyone controlling that pass controls a vital shipping route for every rancher in the region." Understanding dawned in Owen's expression. "So it's not about your ranch specifically, it's about controlling access and charging tolls." "Exactly. My father refused to sell because he knew what Harker intended." She looked out at the darkening landscape. "The flood might have destroyed the buildings, but the pass is still there." They sat in thoughtful silence for several minutes. Finally, Owen spoke, his voice carefully neutral. "Have you considered selling? Not to Harker, but perhaps to someone who would maintain free access to the pass." Victoria turned to him, surprised. "Are you offering to buy my land?" "I'm suggesting it might be an option," Owen replied. "One that would give you the capital to start fresh elsewhere, without Harker's threats hanging over you." Victoria studied his face in the fading light, trying to discern his motives. "And what would you do with it?" "Exactly what your father did, keep the pass open for all legitimate users." He met her gaze directly. "It would be a business decision, Victoria. A sound one." Something in his tone made Victoria hesitate. "Just business?" Owen sighed, running a hand through his hair. "No," he admitted. "Not just business. I can't pretend my feelings for you don't factor into it, but I'd never use that to pressure you into a land deal." Victoria believed him. In the weeks she had known Owen Fletcher, he had proven himself to be a man of integrity. Still, the idea of selling her father's land, even to someone like Owen, felt like a betrayal. "I need to think," she said, rising from her chair. "It's been a long day." Owen nodded, not pushing further. "Of course. Sleep well, Victoria." That night, Victoria lay awake long into the small hours, weighing her options. The practical rancher in her recognized the logic in Owen's suggestion. The flood had devastated her property. Rebuilding would require resources she didn't have. Selling to Owen would resolve the Harker problem and give her the means to start anew. But another part of her rebelled at the idea. That land had been her home for most of her life, contained memories of her father, represented the independence she had fought so hard to maintain. By morning, she had reached no firm decision. She rose early as usual, dressed, and went downstairs to find the house empty except for Mrs. Cooper, who was kneading dough in the kitchen. "Owen's checking the north pasture with the boys," the housekeeper informed her, said they spotted mountain lion tracks yesterday. Victoria nodded, helping herself to coffee. "I might ride out later to help with the search." Mrs. Cooper made a non-committal sound, her hands never pausing in their rhythmic work with the dough. "That man's sweet on you," she said abruptly, not looking up. Victoria nearly choked on her coffee. "I beg your pardon?" "Owen, he's sweet on you." Mrs. Cooper glanced up briefly. "And unless I'm much mistaken, the feeling's mutual." Victoria felt heat rising to her cheeks. "Mrs. Cooper, I don't think—" "It's not my place, I know," the older woman interrupted. "But I've known that boy since he was knee-high to a grasshopper. His father was my husband's best friend back in Texas." She paused her kneading, fixing Victoria with a direct gaze. "He's a good man, honorable, stubborn as a mule sometimes, but his heart's in the right place." "I never suggested otherwise," Victoria said carefully. Mrs. Cooper nodded, returning to her dough. "Just saying, life's too short for overthinking, especially out here. Territory's hard enough without denying yourself happiness when it comes along." With that cryptic advice, she turned away, effectively ending the conversation. Victoria finished her coffee in thoughtful silence before heading out to the barn to saddle her horse. She decided to ride not toward the north pasture where Owen and his men were working, but south, toward her flood-ravaged property. She needed to see it again, to think clearly away from Owen's influence, however well-intentioned it might be. The day was warm, the sky a perfect Montana blue stretching endlessly overhead. Victoria rode at a leisurely pace, giving herself time to think. When she reached what remained of her ranch, she dismounted and walked the property slowly, trying to envision what it had been before and what it might become again. The devastation was still overwhelming, but signs of nature's resilience were already visible. Green shoots pushing through the mud, a pair of meadowlarks building a nest in a tree that had somehow remained standing. Victoria made her way to the pass that had made her property so valuable to Harker. It was a natural gap in the otherwise forbidding mountain range, wide enough for cattle drives or wagons to pass through comfortably. Her father had always maintained the trail, keeping it clear for neighboring ranchers to use freely. Standing there, looking back at the valley, Victoria suddenly understood what her father had seen in this land, not just the ranch itself, but its place in the larger community. The pass wasn't just a convenient route, it was a lifeline for every small rancher in the region. Controlling it came with responsibility as much as opportunity. The sound of approaching hoofbeats pulled her from her reverie. Victoria turned, expecting to see Owen or perhaps one of his hands sent to find her. Instead, she found herself facing James Harker and two rough-looking men she didn't recognize. "Well, well," Harker said, a malicious smile spreading across his face. "Miss Matthews, out for a nostalgic visit, saying goodbye to your father's folly?" Victoria straightened her spine, determined not to show fear despite the pounding of her heart. "This is private property, Mr. Harker. You're trespassing." Harker laughed, the sound echoing unpleasantly off the rocky walls of the pass. "Private property? Look around you, girl. There's nothing left." His expression hardened. "I spent the night in that marshal's jail because of you. Made me look like a fool in front of the whole town." "You managed that all on your own," Victoria replied, backing slowly toward her horse. "Forgery is a serious crime." Harker's face darkened. "You think you're clever, don't you? Hiding behind that fancy deed and your new protector?" He dismounted, taking a menacing step toward her. "But your protector isn't here now, is he?" Victoria's hand moved to her side, where she'd tucked a small derringer in her pocket before leaving Owen's ranch. Her father had insisted she learn to use it years ago, though she had never had cause to draw it against a person. "I'm going to leave now, Mr. Harker," she said, her voice steady despite her fear, "and I suggest you do the same, before you add more crimes to your record." Harker signaled to his men, who dismounted as well, spreading out to block her path to her horse. "I don't think so," he said slowly. "I think we're going to have a little talk about that deed of yours, about how it might have been lost in the flood after all." Victoria drew the derringer, pointing it directly at Harker. "Stay back." Harker hesitated briefly, surprised by the weapon, but then smiled cruelly. "That little pop gun against the three of us?" He took another step forward. "You might get one shot off, but then what?" Victoria knew he was right. The derringer held only 2 bullets, not enough to stop all 3 men. But before she could respond, the crack of a rifle shot echoed through the pass, and a chunk of rock exploded from the ground at Harker's feet. "The next one won't be a warning," came Owen's voice, cold and precise. Victoria didn't dare look away from Harker, but from the corner of her eye, she could see Owen on horseback at the entrance to the pass, rifle raised and ready. Behind him were his 3 ranch hands, similarly armed. Harker froze, fury and calculation warring in his expression. "This isn't your fight, Fletcher." "You made it my fight when you threatened Miss Matthews," Owen replied, his horse moving forward slowly, deliberately. "Now, you and your men are going to mount up and ride away, and if I ever see you near Miss Matthews or her property again, I won't be aiming at the ground." For a tense moment, it seemed Harker might resist, might order his men to draw, but something in Owen's voice, the absolute certainty in it, made him reconsider. With a curse, he backed toward his horse. "This isn't over," he spat, glaring at Victoria. "Yes, it is," Owen countered, his rifle still trained on Harker. "Because the next time you make trouble, it won't be just me and my men you'll answer to. It'll be every rancher who uses this pass freely thanks to the Matthews family. I've been talking to them. They know what you're after." Harker's face contorted with rage, but he mounted his horse, nevertheless, his men following suit. "You've made an enemy today, Fletcher. Both of you." "Wouldn't be the first time someone didn't take kindly to the truth," Owen replied evenly. "Now ride." Harker and his men departed, casting venomous glances over their shoulders as they went. Only when they were well out of sight did Owen lower his rifle and dismount, crossing quickly to Victoria's side. "Are you hurt?" he asked urgently, his eyes scanning her for any sign of injury. Victoria shook her head, suddenly realizing she was trembling slightly as the fear she had suppressed now surfaced. "No, you arrived just in time." She holstered the small derringer. "How did you know I was here?" "Mrs. Cooper mentioned you'd ridden out alone. Given yesterday's confrontation with Harker, I was concerned." His expression was a mix of relief and lingering anger. "When we couldn't find you on the property, this seemed the logical place to look." Victoria nodded, taking a deep breath to steady herself. "Thank you for coming after me, for standing up to Harker." "I meant what I said," Owen told her, his voice softening. "This isn't just your fight anymore. The other ranchers in the area, they remember your father, how he kept this pass open for everyone. When I told them what Harker was planning, they were ready to form a committee to protect it." Victoria looked at him in surprise. "You've been talking to the other ranchers? When?" "Yesterday, after we left town. I sent messages to the major operations in the area." Owen looked slightly sheepish. "I should have consulted you first, I know. But after seeing Harker's reaction to being caught in his forgery, I was concerned he might try something more direct." "Like ambushing me at my property," Victoria said wryly. "Exactly." Owen's expression grew serious again. "Victoria, I owe you an apology for yesterday. Suggesting you sell your land, it was presumptuous of me." Victoria studied him for a moment, seeing the genuine remorse in his eyes. "It was a practical suggestion," she acknowledged. "And made with good intentions, I believe. Still, it wasn't my place." He hesitated. "Your land is your decision. Whatever you choose to do with it, I'll support you." The sincerity in his voice touched Victoria deeply. Owen Fletcher was not the type of man who made such declarations lightly. In that moment, standing in the past that had been her father's legacy, the past that Harker had coveted enough to forge documents and threaten violence, Victoria felt something settle within her, a decision not fully formed but taking shape. "I've been thinking about what you said before," she began carefully, "about partnership." Owen's expression remained carefully neutral, though something flickered in his eyes. "Yes? I believe there might be a third option, neither selling nor rebuilding alone." Victoria gestured around them at the pass in the valley below. "This land has value beyond just grazing. It connects communities, facilitates trade. My father understood that." Owen nodded, waiting patiently for her to continue. "What if," Victoria said slowly, working out the idea as she spoke, "instead of selling the land or rebuilding exactly as before, we established a way station here? A place where cattle drives and supply wagons could rest, replenish, maybe even trade." Her eyes brightened as the concept took shape. "We could rebuild the barn larger, construct proper corrals, perhaps even eventually a small trading post." "We?" Owen asked quietly, the single word laden with meaning. Victoria met his gaze steadily. "Yes, we, if your offer of partnership still stands." She took a deep breath. "Both kinds of partnership." The smile that spread across Owen's face was like sunrise, breaking over the mountains, gradual, then brilliant. He stepped closer, taking her hands in his. "It stands," he confirmed softly. "It stood since the moment I lifted you down from that roof." Victoria felt a matching smile form on her own lips. "I thought you were just being a gentleman." "Started that way," Owen admitted. "But by the time we reached my ranch, I knew there was something special about the woman who could lose everything and still talk about rebuilding." His eyes held hers, sincere and direct as always. "I think I've been falling in love with you since that first day, Victoria Matthews." The words sent a wave of warmth through Victoria's chest. In the weeks she had known Owen, he had proven himself to be everything she admired in a man: kind, honorable, hard-working, and respectful of her independence, even as he offered his support. She had been fighting her growing feelings, convinced that allowing herself to care for him might somehow diminish the independence she had worked so hard to maintain. But standing here now, she understood that true partnership, the kind Owen offered, wouldn't diminish her independence, but enhance it, giving her not just support, but someone who valued her strength, her determination, her vision. "I think," she said carefully, "I might be falling in love with you too, Owen Fletcher." His smile widened, and he raised one hand to gently cup her cheek. "May I kiss you, Miss Matthews?" Victoria nodded, her heart racing as Owen leaned down. Closing the distance between them, his lips met hers in a kiss that started gentle but quickly deepened, conveying months of unspoken longing and newfound hope. Victoria's arms found their way around his neck as she returned the kiss with equal fervor, the last of her reservations melting away. When they finally parted, both slightly breathless, Victoria couldn't help but laugh softly at the dazed look in Owen's eyes. "Is that a yes to my proposal?" he asked, his voice husky. "Which one? The business partnership or the other kind?" Victoria teased, feeling lighter than she had in weeks. "Both," Owen replied, his arms still around her waist. "Though I should clarify that by the other kind, I mean marriage when you're ready." Victoria's breath caught at his directness. "Marriage is a serious step, Mr. Fletcher." "Indeed it is, Miss Matthews," he agreed solemnly, though his eyes twinkled. "Nearly as serious as facing down armed men or rescuing beautiful women from rooftops during floods." Victoria laughed again, the sound echoing off the rocky walls of the pass. "When you put it that way, I suppose it's merely the next logical adventure." Owen's expression softened. "We don't have to decide everything today. The partnership, the business one, can come first. We'll rebuild here together, create something that honors your father's legacy while looking toward the future." His arms tightened slightly around her. And if along the way you decide you'd like to make our partnership permanent in the other sense as well, I'll be the happiest man in Montana territory." Victoria looked around at the land that had been her home for so long, the valley devastated by flood, but already showing signs of resilience, the pass that connected communities, the mountains standing eternal watch. Then she looked back at Owen, seeing in his eyes the same vision of possibility that she felt growing within herself. "I think," she said slowly, "that I would like very much to rebuild here with you, Owen Fletcher. As for the rest," she smiled, "I don't think it will take me very long to be certain about that either." Owen's answering smile was radiant. He leaned down to kiss her again, more briefly this time, but with no less feeling. "Then let's get started, partner." In the weeks that followed, word spread throughout the region about the planned way station at Matthews Pass. Neighboring ranchers, grateful for Victoria and Owen's stand against Harker's attempt to control the vital passage, volunteered labor and materials to help with the rebuilding. The first structure they raised was a new barn, larger and stronger than the one the flood had taken, positioned on higher ground at the entrance to the pass. Next came corrals and a small but sturdy cabin that would eventually be expanded into a proper trading post. Victoria and Owen worked side by side through it all, their business partnership flowing seamlessly into a deeper personal connection. Each evening they would sit on the porch of Owen's ranch house, their ranch house now, as Victoria had accepted his invitation to make it her permanent home and plan the next day's work, their discussions often extending into dreams for their shared future. 3 months after the flood, with the basic structures of Matthews Station, as it had come to be known, complete, Owen took Victoria on a ride to a secluded spot overlooking both their properties, his cattle ranch on one side, her way station on the other, connected by a well-traveled trail. There, with the vast Montana sky stretching endlessly above them, he formally asked for her hand in marriage. Victoria, who had been expecting the question for weeks, nevertheless found herself moved to tears by the simple eloquence of his proposal, and the plain gold ring he offered, a ring that had belonged to his grandmother, carried all the way from Texas in anticipation of finding the right woman to give it to. "Are you certain?" Victoria asked, though she already knew his answer. "Marriage to me means accepting that I'll always have opinions about the ranch, the station, everything." Owen laughed, his eyes crinkling at the corners in the way she had come to love. "Victoria Matthews, I would be deeply concerned if you suddenly stopped having opinions. Your determination, your vision, they're part of why I love you." Victoria slipped the ring onto her finger, marveling at how perfectly it fit. "Then yes, Owen Fletcher, I will marry you." They were wed 2 weeks later in a simple ceremony at the newly constructed Matthews Station, with neighboring ranchers, townspeople, and Owen's ranch hands in attendance. Victoria wore a new dress ordered specially from Helena, and Owen wore his best suit. Mrs. Cooper outdid herself preparing a feast for the celebration afterward, and Victoria's repaired fiddle was passed among several capable musicians who kept the dancing going well into the evening. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the valley that had once been devastated, but was now showing clear signs of recovery, Owen led his bride away from the celebration to a quiet spot near the pass. "Happy?" he asked, his arms around her waist as they watched the fading light paint the mountains in gold and purple. Victoria leaned back against his chest, her hands covering his where they rested at her waist. "More than I thought possible 6 months ago," she admitted. "When the flood came, I thought I'd lost everything." Owen pressed a kiss to her temple. "And now?" Victoria turned in his arms to face him, her expression serene. "Now I know that some things can't be washed away, no matter how high the waters rise. My father's legacy, my determination." She reached up to touch his face gently. "And the kind of love that's worth building a life around." Owen smiled, drawing her closer. "Even if it starts with being rescued from a rooftop?" "Especially then," Victoria replied, rising on tiptoe to kiss him as the last light of day bathed them in its golden glow. The rebuilt Matthews Station standing strong behind them, a testament to resilience, partnership, and the love that had blossomed amid devastation. In the years that followed, Victoria and Owen Fletcher built something remarkable together. Matthews Station became a vital hub for travelers, traders, and cattle drives moving through the territory. The small cabin grew into a proper trading post. Then, a small settlement as other businesses recognized the opportunity of the location. Victoria's business acumen combined with Owen's ranching expertise created an operation that prospered beyond either of their individual dreams. They added to Owen's original herd, expanding their grazing lands while always maintaining free access through the pass for legitimate travelers. 2 years after their wedding, Victoria gave birth to their first child, a daughter they named Elizabeth, after Owen's mother. The following year brought a son, Samuel, named for Victoria's father. The children grew up learning both sides of the family business, riding alongside their parents from an early age, absorbing lessons about ranching, trading, and the importance of community. On the 5th anniversary of the flood that had brought them together, Owen and Victoria stood once more at the highest point of the pass, surveying all they had built. Below them, Matthews Station bustled with activity wagons loading and unloading, cattle being moved through the carefully maintained corrals, the trading post doing brisk business. "Sometimes I wonder," Victoria said quietly, "if my father somehow knew this would happen. He always refused to sell this land, even when it would have been easier." "He knew its value," Owen replied, his arm around her shoulders, "not just in dollars, but in possibilities." He pressed a kiss to her temple. "Just like his daughter." Victoria smiled, leaning into his embrace. "I think he would have liked you, would have approved of what we've built here." "I hope so," Owen said sincerely. "I've tried to honor his vision." "You've done more than that," Victoria assured him. "You've helped it grow beyond what either of us could have imagined alone." As they made their way back down to the station, their children running ahead with the boundless energy of youth, Victoria reflected on the journey that had brought her here. The devastating flood had indeed taken her barn and half her stock, washing away the physical manifestations of her father's work. But in their place had risen something greater, a partnership, a family, a community. And it had all begun with a cowboy who had found her on a roof and lifted her down not just to safety, but to a future brighter than she could have imagined in her darkest hour.